So here we are with Ruviditch. Someone whose Chinese level makes all of us admire from really, really far away.
是卢一凡，跳一的一，平凡的凡。
By Sinologist.
I've begun reading Chinese novels, 水浒传、西游记. But I've been in China very early. After my first year of Chinese studies in France, I was not interested by the modern China. What I wanted to find is the China of the past.
当中国人发现一个外国人不只是会说中文，而且懂他们的诗，会不会你跟他们的关系跟一般的外国人不一样？
那肯定有点不一样。
You know all the foreigners that are fluent in Chinese. 我们最怕的是我们中国朋友跟我们说，中国有一句话 You are one of the few foreigners that actually follows up after what they say.
晚年惟好静，万事不关心。
到底是什么意思？
意思 Poetry is a way of communication which is still alive in China.
They say sometimes it takes foreigner to understand what your own culture is about.
To understand the culture, you need to understand it from different sides. You cannot focus on only one side, only poetry. Chinese people usually say 看看再聊再联系 usually it's a no.
应该可以，应不应该可不可以不知道。
What is important in society is not what you feel, it's what the other feeling. There is a fascination in the West about Chinese character.
When we look at Chinese history, first politicians, they were all poets. 曹操、曹植.
There is no poet in ancient China.
Theaters you translate into Chinese, right?
It's not like translating poetry, because what you translate and you need to translate these situations. I've adapted the play by Guo Hanqing, and he's written a very successful play because it's satiric comedy. She says that the good lover is not always a good husband and the good husband is not always a good lover. Half of the people left the theater. Actor was shocked, but they go on playing on the stage until the end. 山重水复疑无路. But it's a way to say you have to continue, you have to persevere, you have to keep hope.
So here we are with Ruviditch, a sinologist, translator and theater director, someone whose Chinese level makes all of us admire from really, really far away. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, sorry, I make you wait a long time. You know.
I want to start with asking you, considering your Chinese level, which later people will find out, your Chinese name must be really interesting.
It's a transliteration of my French name. In fact, it's Lu Yifan. Lu is the first syllable of my family name, Ruviditch, and Yifan like for Ivan. Of 跳一的一，平凡的凡, Lu Yifan. I like the meaning of the two characters.
Which means?
It means something which is above the common.
Oh, wow, that's very modest name.
But it's quite poetic and with some Taoist influence in it. So I like the name itself, yeah.
Behind every serious title, there is a history, a story. So what is your story? Why Sinologist?
I had a Vietnamese friend when I was in the high school. We were young, we were 17 years old or 16 years old, but he was talking about Chinese philosophy, about martial arts. And I was a bit fascinated by all of that. And I wanted to learn more of it. So I began to look for books. I've begun reading Chinese novels like 水浒传, Water Margin, 西游记, etc. And I was really fond of this literature. I really dropped into the Chinese novels and I was very touched by all the story, the character, and the way all the story were told. So I decided to pursue it with Chinese studies at university from the first year, and I continued to the PhD.
When did China stop being a subject of study? It became like a place you live and stay.
In fact, when I come to China the first time, I was maybe a bit idealistic, I was not interested by the modern China. What I wanted to find is the China of the past. After my first year of Chinese studies in France, I've traveled to Taiwan because I had some Taiwanese friends living in France. So my first day was in Taiwan. And then later I go back to Taiwan and I decided to stay 1 year there. And I've met extraordinary professors there, people coming from origin from mainland China, from Hunan or the place of Shandong, but they were very, very learned people with very strong temperaments, real character, very original. They can talk about Chinese music, calligraphy, paintings. They know poetry, they know Buddhism, Taoism, and for me it was a big discovery. There was a Chinese expression I like a lot, which is 秋闲访道,
I knew this kind of things are going to come up during this conversation.
It's like searching or looking for immortals, but it means that when you are looking for people who have some knowledge, I was very lucky because I've met some of them and it was a real encounter. And with them I've learned a lot and much more that I could learn in the university.
当中国人发现一个外国人不只是会说中文，而且懂他们的诗 understand their culture so deeply， 会不会你跟他们的关系突然就会有一点不一样，就跟一般的外国人不一样？
那肯定有点不一样，因为语言比较通嘛，所以肯定不一样。Of course, people may say, "Oh, you speak very well Chinese, or you are studying Chinese classic literature, so you know better than us." But if Chinese people want to understand their poetry and their classical literature, it's very easy for them. Of course, they have to work and to read a little bit, but it's much more easier for them than for us. To understand sometime a classic text, we spend hours on the text trying, because the dictionary won't help. Each time it's giving you a definition of your words, but the word sentence sometimes isn't clear, and you have to spend a lot of time trying to understand, digging in the meaning, the possible meaning of a text. So for us, it's a lot of effort. I have many Chinese colleagues in university in China, in Shanghai, and they're studying French literature or English literature. They know a lot, of course, because it's their major. So of course, we know maybe more than common people, but at the same level compared to my Chinese colleagues, I'm sure that I'm like someone in the kindergarten, because I can understand a lot, but they understand much more than me. So we're not equal, Sometimes I'm surprised because there are some foreign sinologists very welcome and admired in China, like Stephen Owen, a very famous American sinologist. And when you come to China, the classroom are crowded by students are waiting in the corridors to listen to his conference. But in fact, for me, I know that he's a great researcher and a wonderful person, but I know that my colleagues know at least the same as he does, or maybe much more. But when my colleagues do a lecture, there are only a few students in the classroom.
Yeah.
And when the famous Western sinologists come to Shanghai, to China, is very admired, and everybody wants to know what he's thinking about. Because there is also this idea that foreigners may have different perception of Chinese culture. Yeah. So there is a curiosity, of Chinese people. When I arrived in Shanghai, in China, I was very doubtful, because I think that maybe I'm not going to interest my colleagues if I speak about Chinese literature, culture, because it's a topic that they are more familiar with than me. And with the time, I realized that, in fact, there is a very strong curiosity of Chinese people from scholars, from what the Westerners think and how they perceive, understand the Chinese literature, culture, etc.
They say sometimes it takes foreigners to understand what your own culture is about. So, some people tell your story sometimes better, and you see through them better than if maybe some of your compatriots talk about it. So I totally understand what they are leading to.
To understand the culture, you need to understand it from different sides. You cannot focus on only one side, only poetry, and everything. It's not possible. But of course, dealing with Chinese poetry, you have to understand the history of ancient China and its culture. You have to learn a lot about art. Poetry is very connected with music as well, So you have to learn a lot, and by doing this, you probably have a better understanding of the ancient Chinese culture. But it's not necessarily is going to help you to understand China today. So you have to work on each side, every aspect of Chinese culture to understand it as a whole. Otherwise, you have only a limited approach.
Do you remember that moment where Chinese poems stopped being a text for you? Something you read that struck your mind?
I've had several experiences where I realized that poetry is not only about reading an ancient text, but it's more than that. And in fact, there is an aspect of Chinese poetry which is, I think, ignored by most Westerners, which is Chinese poetry is very alive. It means that once a text, a poem is written down, then it can be used, and you can make this poem your own poem. I will give you an example. For me, the first time I had this kind of experience was when I wanted to study with a teacher in Taiwan. And the first time he received me, he offered me a calligraphy. And the calligraphy was a poem of Wang Wei. 晚年惟好静，万事不关心. The first sentence means when, being my whole age, I don't care about all the work or the affair. I just want to spend a quiet life in my old days. And in fact, I realized that this calligraphy was not just showing me some knowledge or just reciting poems written by Wang Wei, by the Tang poet Wang Wei. It was a way to express his state of mind at that time, and let me understand who it was and what he was pursuing in life, etc. And then you realize that poetry is a way of communication which is still alive in China, something that I did not expect. And sometimes I have some very fun experience as well with another of my teacher, originally from the Shandong province, but he was living in Taiwan, and we were traveling together. He was someone very marginal. He was drinking a lot of alcohol. He got a PhD in nuclear physics in the United States. But, he threw away his diploma. He went back to Taiwan. He do a lot of different jobs, but he was fond of Chinese literature and poetry and painting. And he never had any regular, normal life as we can imagine. He had opened a tea house in Taiwan and invited me to live in this tea house. Just arrived in Taiwan looking for a bedroom. So I was the first guest. Say, you will take care of the tea house. Please, this is your room for free. And every afternoon he was teaching me Chinese classical poetry. And after that, friends were coming, drinking tea, then alcohol, then everyone was going out and
reading poems.
Yeah. And going to swim in the mountains, etc., etc. So it was a very crazy life at that time. And he was a very marginal character and fond of Chinese poetry. And once we were traveling in the north of China, I believe it was in Shanxi, and we arrived in a very small train station. And when we were queuing, to buy the tickets, there was a very small window, with an old Chinese guy behind the small window giving the tickets to travelers. And then he recited one poem and it burst me laugh, because he say, 一柱心握几十年，蓬头长日走世间. It's a very famous poem used by Jin Yong, writing about martial art fiction. So he used this poem coming from the Yuan dynasty. And he's telling the life of Wang Chongyang, which is a very famous Taoist master. Wang Chongyang was living like an hermit in the mountains. So he said when he dwelled in the nest for 100 years, staying there, walking in the mountain like a crazy guy with his hair. But when you use these two verses, a line like a man, like an hermit living here for 100 years, and it's applied to the old man selling the ticket, you have the contrast between the two images. And it was so funny that I realized that, in fact, poetry can become very alive, and it's very interesting. And it's very particular to Chinese culture that a poem is never fixed, determined. It can be changed and used in any way at any time. And it's the case sometimes in newspaper, in politics. Some Chinese official will use some poetry to express something. So you can make it your own at any time. You just have to understand the poem.
It always gives me an impression that it can describe a real scenery. You can have a complete vision of what it means. That's why it's always very fascinating.
月落乌啼霜满天. The moon sets, a crow cries, and then you have the frost flying in the air at night, etc. Only a very few pictures like this, a few words, and you see a world. Immediately you can see. So the Chinese poetry has a very strong evocating power. It can evoke a lot. It can suggest a lot. And this is what is fascinating with Chinese poetry. A very few words can describe and tell you a lot of things.
Why do you think it's like that? In terms of, is it because generally Chinese and Asian culture, in a way, it's less expressive verbally in terms of you hide a lot of emotions within you. So you got to find ways to use art to kind of express what would you like to say. Do you think it has any?
I think there is some connection with the thing in many of Confucian countries. The people don't like to express directly their feeling, what they feel, because what is important in society is not what you feel, it's what the other feeling. So you never want to hurt the people or make the people uncomfortable by saying your problem, your issue, and people like to suggest or evoke what they think. And Chinese people like you to understand or to guess what you have in mind, As
longer as I live here, I realize that language probably has to do something with social behavior also. Chinese language 就很少有人会直接跟你说不 They don't really 直接 reject you. 他们就常常会说等一下再说再看看吧过几天再联系 like, so you don't really know. The same comes to yes as well. Yes is also 应该可以应不应该可不可以不知道尽量我们尽量努力 So you never get this yes or no answer, rather than they leave you somewhere in the air and then you have to figure out later on.
Yeah, that's true. And when Chinese people usually say 看看再聊再联系 usually it's a no. Usually it's a yes is a yes, but a no it's a no. But there is people interpreting this like, they say this is because of losing the face, so you cannot. But I don't think so, because I think it's exaggerated to say it's about losing the face, because if someone suggests you something or invite you to something, you say, no, I don't want to. The people are not going to lose the face, Or if you do answer this way to your boss in public, maybe your boss will lose face. But if in a private area or with friends, if you say, no, I don't want to, I don't have time for this, it's not going to. But it's a bit offending. It's a bit rude, because that's true, because the Chinese people are not used to to use the negative form very easily. And very often they try to avoid, a situation where people are going to reject you or give you a negative answer. And that's, by the way, what people, Chinese people like to find connection, because, for example, if I ask you directly a question, maybe it will be a no. But I know someone that knows you, a friend of mine, he knows you very well. And then I will prefer to go to the third part, asking me, because it's kind of safety. I'm sure that this person will convince you and we get a yes, because it will difficultly get a no from you. So what Chinese people sometimes are trying to find relation and connection among themselves.
That's a very good point, actually. I also observe, right? Sometimes maybe you can just speak beside of that person, but then they won't talk to you directly. They will just find, as you say, somebody that knows you, then approach you from the other side.
And sometimes it makes it more complicated. It's a lot of work. So as being a Chinese people, sometimes, it's exhausting, because you have to work a lot, find a connection. You cannot directly say no. Sometimes you have to be careful when you say yes, etc. So it's a lot of work, in fact.
Do you think your character has changed towards that direction a little bit after staying in China long enough?
Probably a little bit, yeah. Because sometimes I was shocked, by some Western reaction. I had a friend in China who was invited. We were invited by Chinese friends, say, "Oh, let's go tomorrow. We're going to travel to this place." And my friend was understanding Chinese but living in France, and said, "No, I don't want to." And I was shocked, because it was so rude, and then I had a feeling, that there is a gap between the way the Chinese people express themselves and the way Westerners speak.
Sometimes I hear from people who doesn't live in China. They don't have much knowledge about Chinese language, and they will just say, like, so what is the Chinese character? Is it a letter? Is it a syllable? Is it a meaning or a sound? And I can never really find the correct answer to that, because I think it's all of it sometimes. Separate characters I can read. Let's say 4 characters, so I can read separately. But once I put it all together, I don't understand the meaning, even though I can separately understand each one of them. So when somebody asks you, what is the Chinese character? What is your answer?
First, I would say it's not a letter, for sure. It's a word. I would say it's a word, and a word connected with a sound. There is a fascination in the West about Chinese character, because there is only a few countries who have kept this kind of writing system right now, and China is the most emblematic country with keeping its Chinese character. And it's true that Chinese characters sometimes are more linked to an idea rather than several or one definition. When you're learning the Chinese department, usually you can write what you can say, so you have to write both. It's not like we are learning pinyin and all what Chinese.
But a lot of people can speak and they cannot write or read.
I've discovered this very lately.
Me too, by the way.
I didn't think it was possible to learn only oral Chinese without being able to write it down. But in our university, we have a Western student coming from, but she grew up in Hong Kong. So she speaks very fluently Chinese, like Chinese students. But she say, when we had an exam, she say, "Can I write in English or can I write in pinyin?" I say, "And why?" So, "I cannot read and write Chinese." And I was shocked, because she has an incredible level of Chinese, command of Chinese language, but she cannot write Chinese character.
It's a very common thing also. 我当时学中文的时候，让我最惊讶和最复杂的一个词就是意思。
意思，
这个意思就到底是什么意思？Nobody knew. 不好意思，没什么意思，意思一下，你什么意思？
意思，
对，到底什么意思 ？Nobody knows. It's just fascinating how many ways you can use the same thing.
Because you also Chinese people saying that one Chinese character has a lot of meanings, while Western words have only one meaning. And it's not true. If you open an English dictionary, for example, you check the word to get, or even a simple item or a word like a chair or a table, and you will find a lot of different meanings, right? But these meanings are well separated. You understand in this situation, this word has this meaning, and in other situation, in other context, it will change. In Chinese language, the border, the frontier between a meaning and another sometimes is very tight, it's very tiny, and it's not always easy to identify the real meaning of the word.
When we look at Chinese history, first politicians, they were all poets or writers, from Cao Cao, Cao Zhi, Anshi, and so many. Why do you think poetry and power were so closely connected in ancient China?
At first, maybe we can change the phrasing here, because there is no poet in ancient China. There is no word for saying a poet.
Philosopher?
No, they were all of them were scholars. They were civil servants. They were mandarins. but they were not, there is not a role, a function, or a job like a poet. The word poet in Chinese has been important from the West between the 19th and 20th century. So you have a lot of words, even we have dictionary about Chinese poetic terms. So you have a lot of words about Chinese poetry, a lot of forms, etc. But there is no such a function or role like a poet. So in fact, even Tu Fu and Li Bai, we say the most famous poets, but in fact, they were not poets. They were civil servants. They were occupy official function, position in the imperial system. In fact, poetry was very important in the Chinese culture, in the training of the elites. It was very important to master the classics, including the Chinese poetry. You know that Chinese classics, there were 5 basic classics, including one, which is the classic of poetry, the Shijing, which was very important. And Confucius states that if you want to learn to speak, you have to learn poetry. If you don't know poetry, you're not able to speak. And it was very literal. It's not just a comparison, because during the period of, for example, the spring and autumn period, time just after Confucius, and war in state period, all the China was divided into many small kingdoms, and all the diplomatic exchange between the kingdom were processed by reciting poetry from the Shijing, the book, the classic of odes. So to understand the situation, a king or an envoy was telling a poem, and then the king was understanding the message and was answering by another poem. Okay, so this was the way. So poetry have been from the beginning very connected with diplomacy, with politics, and with the way someone has to express himself. But at the same time, it would be wrong to say that Chinese poetry is only about politics or diplomacy. It's just one aspect, but it was very important. And to answer your question, why all the emperors, why many Mandarin were mastering Chinese poetry, because it was the basic of expressing oneself in diplomatic circumstances. The goal of these scholars, even Tu Fu, Li Bai, they were learning classics and Chinese poetry, not just for fun or just to know the beauty of the language, to express themselves. All the Chinese scholars have one goal, is one day or another to be able to serve the kingdom or the Chinese empire. And so they all have tried to serve and to be called by the imperial court, so to serve the country.
How the poem gets successful? Like we know, in music, right? There are certain notes, if you hit, the hit is there. But then with poetry, I'm wondering, especially those times, what would make you feel successful?
Chinese poetry, like many other poetry, is about imagination. If you describe exactly what you mean by direct images, then there is no space for imagination. If you find a distance between what you want to express and the way you express it by using scenery, image, etc., then you are opening a large space. And this space is very important. If the image and the object you want to express are too far away, then it's not working. It's too close, it's too easy to guess. It's the right distance, then you can feel that something is happening in this space. So for our imagination, we need this kind of distance, and poetry is providing the distance of your imagination for the thing to understand what the poets have tried to set up.
In Chinese, 刚刚好.
刚刚好, yeah.
As a musician, I understand that the score doesn't become music until you play it. Same, I assume, with poetry, doesn't come alive once you probably read it or stage it. I want to talk a little bit about you becoming a stage director.
In France, I have some contact with actors. I was always fond of theater and reading theater, watching theater plays, etc. But I never expected or never imagined that I will, once in Shanghai, begin to carry on doing theater. When I was in the French consulate, I realized that we have a lot of resources around us. Chinese students using French to play theater. Then I have Chinese colleagues writing PhD thesis on French dramatists. So there was many resources. So I said, we have so many resources. So why not to try to organize a real play? Not just doing some activity in school. And the consulate encouraged me to do so. So we invite one famous stage director from France. He comes with an actor. When they arrived, for me, everything was prepared. I found, a Chinese producer wanted to produce a French play. So we do the pre-casting. So everything was ready. And I was sure that when the French stage manager will arrive, he will work for 1 month and more, plus 1 week. And then I will go to see the result of my project. And I was happy like this. And then on the first day, I received a phone call from the theater. So, Ivan, we have a problem. The actor who has been here today is not here. We cannot work with him. So, let me check this. So I'm calling the producer, etc. Next day, Ivan, we have a problem. The stage design they're showing us is not exactly what we wanted. It's not the same color. It's not the same. Let me check with the producer. So again, phone call, etc. Next day, Ivan, we were supposed to play the premiere in Shanghai. Now we are going to Ningbo, which is 100 kilometers from here. So, and they say it's 2,000 seats, large theater. So how we can handle this? I say, let me check. And every day there was something happening. So I decided every day to come with 2 cups of coffee for the director and the assistant. And then I was doing myself the translation, helping, giving advice, checking if everything was okay, etc. Until the end. And then we had the premiere. The producer has made a lot of announcement, but not in the way because it was a French contemporary play. So it's like a comedy, but very particular, because there is a very repetitive structure in the play. And the Chinese audience are not used to this. And when I've seen the announcement in Impo, I think, there is a problem with this because it was advertised like French comedy, like something you can watch on TV. So the people were coming with grandparents and grandchildren, etc. And then the first day of the play, the people were complaining, many people stand up, half of the people left the theater. Actor was shocked, but they go on playing on the stage until the end. So it was a disaster for everyone. We were all shocked and we could not understand what happened. And then we have a meeting to try to see what happened. And after a whole night of brainstorming, for the next day, with the stage director, we decided to cut part of the take because it's repetitive. So let's cut a part so it become funny earlier and also late. Okay, so we enter in the funny part earlier. And then the stage director think a lot, say maybe I should say a few words on the stage before it begins. And on the next day, after a lot of brainstorming, you say, okay, I don't understand the Chinese people and the culture, so I will say a very simple word. And you just say this. You say, it's the first time I'm coming to China, first time I'm working with Chinese actor. And I'm very happy of this experience and the work we've done together. And the play you are going to see is probably different than the play you usually previously seen in the past. It's a different kind of play. Only this. And I was translating to Chinese to the audience. And then the next day was perfect. No one left. People were laughing. And then when we come back to Shanghai, the actor asked me, because the director had to leave, the actor begged me to say, Ivan, please, each evening when the play begins, be here with us on the stage and say a few words to the audience so they understand what we are going to play. I say, okay. And the stage director wanted me to watch the whole play, to give advice if possible, etc. And then I realized something, because they play in Shanghai Grand Theater in the small studio for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And each evening I was watching the play. And I was not boring, because I was thinking, this actor is going to do this properly. Is he going to react on time? What's going to happen next? I was really with the actor playing on the stage, but I was sitting and watching, supervising all that. And it was a beginning and it was a success. And so later, the French consulate gave me a lot of other projects. Any actor or stage director coming to Shanghai, say, please go and find it. Ivan is going to accompany you, and et cetera, et cetera. And it began like this. And after I left the consulate, I've created a group of theater in the university, but it was with professional training and experts coming from France and all over Europe. And we trained a group of actors for 10 years. Some had some experience, some other had no experience at all. But at the end, they all were performing in the largest stage in China, in Shanghai, in Guangdong, in Beijing, etc.
It's amazing, like what's with the theater production happening nowadays in China. Every time I go, I'm so fascinated by the productions, music, staging. A while ago, I went to watch, maybe you've seen that, 永不消失的电波. Beautiful stage direction. It's just like so much of Chinese history telling, but in such a modern way that everybody resonates. So back to localization, theaters you translate into Chinese, right? What is the challenge, let's say, or easy part of it?
The challenge, I think, when you translate theater, it's not like translating poetry. It's not exactly the same, because what you translate and you need to translate is situations. It's not about the language. The language can be very right or properly translated, but if the people cannot catch and the right situation, then it won't work. And this is a difficulty. If it's a French play translated into Chinese, for example, there is many cultural connotation in the text. And if the play is happening in France or in Europe, you can exchange it with local stories, for example, or expression. Okay, you cannot use 曹操 in the proverb, 曹操就说曹操就早就到. It's a kind of expression you can use in a French play or in an English play. So you have to find equivalents, and it's not very easy sometimes because you have to think a long time because you find something that's still is happening in the Western culture, but can be understood by the Chinese audience.
You have done a couple of like a Chinese words, right? Which
I've adapted the play by Qing, and he's written a very successful play, and we have many texts of him. And I've adapted one, a story of courtesan, which is a satiric comedy into modern Chinese. But it was a work that I've done with a Chinese and foreign team because it's a teamwork, in fact. So I was a director, I was participating to translation, but we had a Chinese playwright who were working with us and carefully was adapting the language of Qing to something much modern. For example, in Chinese opera, the ending sometimes is very short. There is one couple of verse, one song is short and the end. But on theater, it's difficult to have the last act very short because you feel like there is no conclusion or it's too quick. So sometimes we have to adapt the text. But I was very fond of this kind of challenge because when we done this, I think it was very useful even for Chinese people because when Chinese people go and listen to Chinese opera nowadays, it's very hard to understand. Even if you have the text in Chinese, it's classical Chinese, sometimes poetry, there's poetry everywhere in the songs, etc. And so you understand, many people will understand the situation, but you won't necessarily understand all the part of the text.
It's like Italian people going for opera, right?
Exactly.
You kind of understand, but not fully.
Yeah, not fully. And so when you convert the text to the opera livret to theater play text, then you have all the details of the language. And the people can listen for the first time many things that the playwright Qing have said. So it was very funny because it's satiric comedy and there is about a courtesan which is very strong, who make very funny remark on man and love and what is a husband, what is a lover, what's the difference.
What is it?
She says that the good lover is not always a good husband and the good husband is not always a good lover. So she's very funny because the name of the character is Zhao, is very famous in Chinese literature, and it's a woman which has a very dark view on men, and she see the man like liar, cheater, and show herself she keep distance with most of the men. But then in the story she has another young courtesan which is a bit naive, and we fall in love with a rich man, son of a very famous official, prefect, etc. And she's been seduced by this man, and she believed that after the wedding she will be happy, she will be a lot of treasure, etc., etc. And in fact, the man is a very bad husband because this kind of son of official is kind of Fuertai of the Yuan dynasty. In ancient China, when you want to leave your husband, it's a line on the paper, which is called the letter of divorce. It's xiushu, it's in Chinese. And if you have this letter, you're free. But without the letter, you cannot do anything. And the bad guy is punished at the end. And this is in fact because you were asking about the similitude with French or Western theater, for example. Well, it's very close to the situation, are very close.
Because human problems are all the same, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the humor, the laughter is always the same. Is the kind of comic humor of situation, of misunderstanding, etc. So you have all this kind of same sense of humor, in fact. But the context and the way it is performed in China is very different. Because in Chinese opera, the sung part are very important, much important than the text. Western theater, it's all about dialogues and talking. So the way it's done and the structure of the play are quite different. The themes and the subject, the topic of the play, the technique of the comedies are very similar.
Finish the sentence.
Okay. I tried.
China is not hard to understand. It is
not hard to understand, but long to understand. Like Chinese language, in fact.
World becomes a better place when
people are listening poets and to the wise. Poets, in the Western tradition, has been always considered like prophets in some way. Yeah. And it's not so different in China.
The biggest challenge in translation is
to translate the invisible part, what is not expressed in the word. Especially when we're talking about Chinese poetry. In Chinese poetry, the main meanings are outside the word. Yi zai yan wai is above the language, outside the language. The words are just settings that you have to find the meaning of the words, behind the words. So that's the most difficult part. It's true for every poetry, translating the invisible, but particularly for Chinese poetry. Yeah.
Generally in society too, they say every time you hear something said, you have to hear what is unsaid.
Yeah.
That is the key to understand, which back to can be so tiring. I know I have spent too much time in China
when I'm wearing two trousers in winter or drinking hot tea in summer, in the middle of summer.
So many people can relate now. You know, all the foreigners that are fluent in Chinese, one thing that 我们最怕的是我们中国朋友跟我们说中国有一句话 and then most of the time like 大概率 that I won't understand what's happening after that is like 99%. But you are one of the few foreigners that actually follows up after what they say. Is you are not having a mental, blackout after. Is there any Chinese proverb that you like to use a lot?
There is one that I like a lot, not using very often, but at a critical time. It's coming from a poem, but it's a very lovely way to say to keep hope and to wait until the end and say 山重水复一无路. So 山重 is like mountains upon mountains, river upon river. 一无路 is like there is no more road to follow. There is no more road left. And then the next sentence saying 柳暗花明又一村. Under the shadow of the willow, you see the bright flowers. And then at the end, after so many mountains and river, at least you find a village. So it's a way to say you have to continue, you have to persevere, you have to keep hope. And I like a lot this expression, sometimes using it to encourage students to.
How about daily life? Some Chinese word you use a lot.
吹牛. For example, because there is no very good equivalent in English or in French.
Any French word or saying that you think all of us should know?
By working in theater, there is a word that is often missing in English and in Chinese as well. It's a French word calling enjeu. When you have something to win or to lose at some point, we use it very often in the theater because when there is a situation, a big situation in the play, usually there is a big enjeu. It means that here the character have to make a choice. It's a winning or losing.
很多网络词 those kind of things. Do you follow up usually, or your students come and share with you this kind of?
No, sometimes I catch one word here and there, but I'm not trying to follow them because it's moving too fast. And I don't know if this word will stay long, and I prefer to stay focused on classical Chinese. Yeah.
Recommend 2 travel destinations for someone just visiting China for the first time.
I would say anyway, avoid touristy place at any cost. Don't go to the large city and try to go, to the far, to the countryside. Or I would say go to all the mountain of Zhejiang or the Sichuan province, which is very nice. But go around on the mountain, Qingquanshan or this kind of mountain, or go to the north of China because, the Henan province, for example, now it's a bit arid, a bit dry. But it's the center of Chinese. It's a central plain, and it's the cradle of Chinese civilization. Everything is begun here and there. So I think that I will advise to go to this place because Shanghai, Beijing, and all the big cities, sooner or later, you will
be there.
So anyway.
For someone who has never entered the world of Chinese poetry, what is one piece of poem or like a book that we would recommend to start their journey with?
I will recommend to avoid poetry collection written or translated by Sinologist. Because usually you're going to give up after a few pages because usually it's not well written. It's good, like if you are learning or studying Chinese poetry, but if you want to travel in the world of Chinese poets, etc., I think it's not a very good choice. Even the great sinologists who has written very good analyses on Chinese poetry, but they are not good translators. I will advise people to find good translation. There is also a translator, but he's not well known, so I can mention his name because he's one of my favorite translators. He was an Irish missionary living in Hong Kong, around Hong Kong. His name is John Turner. And he has written a book which is a golden treasury of Chinese poetry. And it's someone who spent his whole life translating poetry. He didn't translate a lot of poems, probably 70 or 80 poems, but it's wonderful translation and restituting the atmosphere of Chinese poem very well. Not modern, not classic, in the middle of the two. It's a very good book for people who like nice poetry. But the modern poetry, Chinese poetry translated by Raphan, Gary Snyder, I think are still very successful.
So their translations are better than the Sinologists?
Unfortunately.
Okay.
Because you know why? Because in fact it's two traditions. In France, for example, there are poets and there are translators. And translator come from the academic field, and most of translators follow academic standards. So they won't change a word. They will keep, stick to the dictionary, while someone which is a poet would probably make mistakes here and there. But the translation and the whole feeling you have while reading the poems is quite different.
I never thought about that, actually.
Trust me, most of the translation made by sinologists will be forgotten very soon, and it won't be read by people, because sometimes they are truthful, faithful to the original.
It's lacking the art.
They're missing the art. And sometimes someone will translate very badly, but who has a good, writing style, can win over a faithful translation. So it's not very fair. It's maybe unfair by some way. But sometimes we're talking about poetry. It's not translating a manual of technology or something else.
If a young student wants to pursue this career of poetry in the times when social media is taking over, what would you tell them? Why this is still important?
I think that's in today because we're in social media, so it's a bit ironic to say that, but I would say that if we want to understand poetry, we have to spend some time on it. It's a way of life, in fact. You have to go back to your room with your glass of wine, with your candle, spend some time quietly, read the text, appreciate the text, and that's the only way, I think, to really go deeper into poetry. If you look the life of the most of Chinese poets, there is two aspects of their life. Sometimes they're looking for company. They like being friends, drinking, enjoying an evening and a party. And sometimes what they need to create something, create a new poems or work, sometimes it's in solitude. And to create new things, artwork, piece of masterpieces, you have to be sometimes alone. You have to be in solitude. That's the best way to get inspiration. Forget the outside world and to focus on your inner feelings and be alone with your text. And then progressively you will understand something else that you can understand by scrolling the media, the screen, and looking on Wikipedia, I don't know where.
That's a nice message.
Thank you
so much for your time. I greatly, truly admire what you do, because I understand that the level of understanding you have about this country is like somewhere we really can only admire from far away, and then it's great to just have it in front of me to have a little bit of glimpse of that world. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you. One small thing I do every day that makes me irrationally happy.
Drinking wine? I don't know. Stretching.
Cheers.
Cheers.